Welcome to Defense News. I'm Vago Muradian. Improving the Marine Corps' ability to project amphibious power worldwide, and how the Navy is balancing cost and requirements as it develops its new ballistic missile submarine. But first, Defense Secretary Ash Carter went to Silicon Valley to unveil new technology initiatives as the United States seeks to remain ahead of increasingly tech-savvy adversaries. One was a new DoD cyber strategy to deter future attacks by making it clear the United States will use all means at its disposal to respond to future attacks. And Carter called on top tech firms to devote their talent and technology to improve national security. Fast-moving threats demand Silicon Valley's agility, and to bridge the cultural divide, Carter wants a new office in Silicon Valley to facilitate cooperation with a Pentagon that, despite acquisition reforms, remains slow-moving. Carter also launched a mid-career program to attract top cyber professionals to uniform. Here to discuss what Carter's moves mean are Byron Callan, a veteran Wall Street analyst with Capital Alpha Partners, and former Pentagon Industrial Policy Chief Steve Grundman, who's now with the Atlantic Council. Guys, thanks very much for joining us.
You're welcome.
Steve, I want to start with you. Why do you think Carter's initiatives are so important, and does it really mark a change or a turn in how the Pentagon does business?
It'll remain to be seen whether it marks a change in how the Pentagon does business, but the fact that the Secretary uses an early day, one of the early days in his tenure to put his personal stamp behind this initiative, to put his personal stamp on that he thinks engaging Silicon Valley is important, I think is quite a big deal, and one that has significance both for its ostensible audience in Silicon Valley, but almost as importantly for the acquisition management system and the people in it who do pay attention to what the leadership cares about.
Because one of the things that he drove home at his lecture at Stanford was, how he was attracted to national security, wasn't it, Byron? What did you find interesting about what he said?
I found it really profound. A lot of the things that he said, it really harkened back to an era when he entered the defense sector. He was at Stanford, and he was asked by Professor Drell to work on national security problems. So this link between academia, Silicon Valley, and the Department of Defense is something that I think he's keenly interested in restoring.
Talk to us, Byron, a little bit about how Wall Street has reacted to this, because we've discussed this, the three of us have discussed this, and we do view this as to be sort of a very, very key moment and a key initiative for Dr. Carter. How has Wall Street reacted, and how should companies be responding to his message?
It's been crickets. It's really been very quiet. The subject really wasn't discussed in a lot of the earnings calls that are now rolling out as companies report their March quarter results. But I think you are seeing some strategic change. The Raytheon acquisition of WebSense, that was a commercial cyber technology that actually can bridge some of these gaps between defense and commercial, is one manifestation. And then, of course, we have the whole SpaceX move into the launch business, which I think is another very different change in the way this business has been run.
Well, talk to us a little bit, and Steve, give us your sense on this, because part of what Dr. Carter's trying to do is to really drive culture change here, which he's talked about over and over and over again, about how important talent is, attracting the best talent to the department. It's something that he did discuss, when he was the deputy as well. What's it going to be like to drive this culture change? And does the SpaceX cooperation with the Air Force sort of mark a path on how you can harness some of this culture change?
I think, when you talk about the need to drive culture change, I can't help but recall what I thought was one of the most interesting parts of Better Buying Power 1.0, which then Undersecretary Carter launched in the summer of 2010. And the quote from that press conference I recall is him saying, at that time, 4 years ago, I don't do culture. And I think one of the things that Secretary Carter learned both in that job, then as the deputy, and that he brings to his tenure as secretary is you got to do culture if you want to change the system. And so again, that's why I think the symbolism of this was important, because it's some part of the foundation of changing the culture of Pentagon acquisition is to change people's sense of what's important. And that may sound a little soft, but I think it's important.
Well, I mean, but one of the things he was trying to accomplish with Better Buying Power at the time was sort of, hey, let's make very, very clear rules to move the process along much more quickly while you're working at building up, obviously some of those longer range skills. Byron, talk to us a little bit about, SpaceX and Go ahead.
Well, no. I think it's important to recognize this isn't just about cyber. It's about a much broader range of technologies that the commercial sector is really driving at this point. If you think about autonomy, some of the things that are going on in satellite services.
Right.
So it's not just cyber. Space launches, obviously, when we've already seen this change, but there's a lot going on in the commercial world that I think the Department of Defense has to look at longingly and try and tap into and bring into their, to address their mission needs.
Well, I think the paradigm of buying, I guess, that most of the coverage of these events have featured was the idea of the Pentagon buying from small startup venture financed Silicon Valley firms, and I'm not sure that is particularly what Ash Carter is up to there. Hearkening to your question about SpaceX, the most interesting thing I've seen in the last 2 weeks was a panel discussion at the Space Symposium a couple weeks ago on space launch, and on the panel was the CEO of United Launch Alliance, the president of SpaceX, a senior executive from Aerojet, a senior executive from Blue Origin,
right.
Which is so they're arrayed on the stage was the old space industry, a couple of new pieces of the space industry, and that kind of variety and competition between and among them is, I think, what Carter is really trying to engage.
Byron, we've got about 30 seconds. Talk to us also about one of the key takeaways on a podcast that Ash did about sort of his view on the kind of companies he wants to compete in this space.
Well, I think there was an Andreessen Horowitz podcast that was done the day after. Andreessen Horowitz is a venture capital company that Secretary Carter visited. I think it was a very clear and important recognition that you can't address this technology access issue by having large heritage defense companies buy small technology startups. They're entirely different cultures, and there's a generational divide, a cultural divide that I think he wants to see these companies deal directly with the department, not through an intermediary.
And not get bought up, but remain independent.
Absolutely.
Guys, thanks very much for joining us. A very important topic. Thank you very much. Coming up, how the Marines will use new ships to project power worldwide. You're watching Defense News.